10 miles now, sir. It's coming down through 200,000 feet.
10 miles, 200,000 feet, thank you.
10 miles from vertical flight, and it's through 200,000 feet.
Copy.
Manager, MCC, we are able to identify a tumbling object.
Copy.
Copy. And Mission Manager, MTC, be advised, from our vantage point, we do not see a throat shoot. Negative throat.
Copy. Copy. Vertigo Mach, the track there's 2009 miles, sir.
Thank you for Vertigo.
Vertigo Mach, it looks like we have a no-shoot, sir. Vector 200, put it under those 8 miles, look for an impact.
DC, negative throat, negative shoot.
Copy, we see the visual.
Impact at 5855 past the hour.
Impact there.
Impacted vehicle on the surface.
That there are rogue nations that have, nuclear technology.
Yeah.
Maybe the specifics of that technology is classified, but the fact that that country has nuclear technology isn't so much a secret. The same thing with this, the fact that there are things flying around in our controlled airspace that we don't know what the heck they are. We don't know how they work. And we frankly don't have a clue for where they're from or what the intent is. That's not a secret, and it shouldn't be a secret. I don't think physics and the mathematics should be a secret. What I think should remain a secret is our critical technology. I will tell you this right now, that if I had to choose between disclosure and full disclosure and sacrificing our national security, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't sacrifice our national security for that. Now, is there a way to have a conversation where we can still have disclosure and protect national security? Well, that's precisely what my colleagues and I are trying to do. We're trying to thread that needle very carefully. None of us want to compromise national secrets. None of us want to hurt this country. But what we do want to do is get that information that's not classified, that information that does squarely belong to the people of the United States and potentially the world, but certainly your taxpayer dollars were paid to find answers, and now we have some answers. You deserve those answers.
There's a follow-up question from Blake and Brent Cousins of Third Phase of the Moon, the world's largest UFO YouTube channel. How far advanced do you think private corporations have in technology? Do you think Lockheed Martin may have developed a Tic Tac? Has Lue asked Lockheed what assets they have in their possession?
Wow. That's a really good question. Let me answer this way. Have we asked? Yes. I'm not going to tell you what the answer is because part of that answer requires approval from certain organizations and military contractors, and I'm not at liberty to answer on their behalf. I've made it very clear what I said, and I went right up to that line by saying, when I was asked, do I think that the U.S. government is in possession of this exotic material? And I said yes. And I stand by that. But at this point, I really can't elaborate much more beyond that, only because this is still unfolding. And what we don't want to do is, the truth be told, the last thing we want to do is to scare the gopher to go back into its hole. It's just now poking its head out of the hole. And we're trying to coax it, saying it's okay to come out. It's okay to have this conversation. So, what I don't want to do is preemptively say something that all of a sudden forces the gopher to go back underground for the next 70 years.
I got the final question from Third Phase of Moon. How far advanced do you think the U.S. government or private corporation are in advanced tech that the public is not aware of? The B-1 bomber was classified for 40 years until the public was aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of advanced tech. I'm not going to go into it right now. That's certainly not my place to do that. But the U.S. government and other countries are always trying to maintain a competitive advantage over their adversaries, and we should. I think that's money well spent. We have a tremendous amount of advanced technology in this country. Now, if you're asking the question of if that was a derivative of some sort of UAP, the answer to that would be, unfortunately, it's pretty. That type of vehicle would be very, very advanced, and it should be no surprise that if let me give you an example. It's a bit like imagine an aircraft, a 747 that crashes in the Amazon, and everybody escapes. They jump out of the plane with parachutes, and everybody's fine. But the plane crashes, and a indigenous group of people from the Amazon who've never seen human beings outside of their own little, if you will, village, come across bits and pieces of this aircraft. And they find glass from the cockpit, and they pick it up, and they realize that glass can be used to skin the meat from their kill much easier, right? So they reverse engineer the glass, and they're using it now as a tool to cut skin away from the meat, right? That's not the intended purpose of the glass, right? And there's no way they're going to recognize that, how to rebuild a 747 in the middle of the Amazon. But it doesn't mean that there isn't bits and pieces that can be picked up and certain things gleaned from that. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. I'm not going to speak on behalf of our government what it has or has not done. But that's probably a better analogy when answering that question. Do we have the skill sets needed to even study and investigate something like that? Well, we're now beginning to realize that the physics probably lies within the realm of quantum physics. We still don't understand it very well. So there's probably a lot more we need to learn before we could figure out how to reverse engineer something like that.
And they're not any known human technology
that we know of.
The SAPs, special access programs, and unacknowledged special access programs get brought up a lot, especially when talking about the UFO subject. There are such a thing as unacknowledged special access programs, or the waived SAPs.
Of course there are. Yeah, that's in law. You can see that.
Yeah, I forget which title it is. I remember Christopher Mellon actually he named the whole title.
Yeah, and there's also covert action, which is under Title 50. But that's all. This is these are mechanisms to, the more sensitive of an effort you have, the more you want to protect it from the enemy, and so the more you compartmentalize it.
How do you connect oversight community or bodies?
Sure.
To even.
I'll give an example. With covert action, you have the Gang of Six and Gang of 12. There's always oversight. Even no matter how secret something is, somebody in the chain of command has to know. Period. Even if it's waived or bigoted SAP. And when I say bigoted, people say bigoted. What does that mean?
You have it on a bigot list.
Yeah, right. It's a bigot list. Whether waived or unacknowledged SAPs, someone is still in the loop. Someone has to be, and that all good because you're spending taxpayer money. Someone has to be held accountable. Otherwise, you run into issues like we did with Operation Yellow Fruit. So there is always an accountability lane somewhere. And if these SAPs are being run without that accountability, then they're not real SAPs. Then they're rogue operations. Then these are operations that are running under the radar and frankly are illegal, because there are very specific guidelines if you want to run those type of programs, and you can't deviate from those at all. So I don't think that there's some waived or unacknowledged SAP at this point. If they are, they're scared shitless. Because right now the gig is up. They know. If they get found out that they've been running these rogue operations with no accountability, they're done. They're going to jail. I mean, today. So it's not. It definitely would not. I would be very surprised if there was some type of rogue operation. Now, I do think there may be some legacy efforts that are falling under authorities that were once put down and now forgotten. It's not uncommon that a memo establishing a program from some Secretary of Defense in 1978 is still being used. We still use, for example, the National Security Act of 1947. A lot of the new rules and regulations that we have coming out of the department and the intelligence community stem from the National Security Act of 1947, right after World War II.
Yeah.
It's almost been 100 years, and we're still putting that. If you look at a lot of the DoD policies I put out, it'll say in accordance with National Security Act of 1947. It'll say EO 12333 as amended. And that's the way we do things. And it's not impossible, because I've seen it a couple times where you run into an organization or an effort, and they're saying, well, we're using this as our guiding authority. And you look at like, whoa, I mean, dude, I was in kindergarten when that memo was signed. You might want to get that updated.
So you think it's possible that there are such programs in legacy programs? And is that what they're actually called, legacy programs?
Legacy, yeah.
Okay. So is that feasible?
It is unlikely, but it is certainly well within the realm of possibility. I do not doubt that some of those legacy programs still exist. Whether it involves the UFO program remains to be seen, because we've done a lot of digging around, and if they exist, they're really dug themselves deep, which is I mean, kudos to them, but I know where to dig. I know where to put the holes in the ground to find what we want to look for. I do think that there may be some legacy guidance out there that people may still be using to not want to have this conversation. But I think even more importantly, there may be two other issues at hand. Either the technology is so revolutionary that someone has made a decision unilaterally to not share this even with their own chain of command, which is a problem. Or the other possibility as well is that they're scared. Now they know that there's accountability, and now they know that someone's going to have to face the music and tell Congress and the American people and the chain of command that, yeah, we've been doing this whole time, and we've been doing it under your nose. And yeah, we lied to you. We didn't tell you. That's a problem, because there's significant liability there. If you imagine some person, a pilot who reports an incident, and now because of it is forced to undergo psychological evaluation, is taken off of flight status, and as a result maybe is reassigned, and now loses his marriage or her marriage because of this, and furthermore now becomes homeless and loses everything for doing the right thing. Loses everything, is now living on the streets and homeless because they reported a UFO sighting at some point in the past. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but can you imagine the liability? What we would have to owe that individual to come back and say, you know what, we destroyed your life and your career, and at the end of the day, you were right. That's you're talking, depending on how many people that's ever happened to. If it's happened, then that's a hell of a liability. I mean, that's one hell of a lawsuit.
Yeah, I know it's been brought up, MJ12. If that was such a thing, I don't understand if it's like an official body or it's like something that would be rogue,
or both,
or both. Interesting. And again, that there's a group that has been brought up called Zodiac.
I can't comment on that.
Okay. And what about Collins Elite?
That I won't comment on, other than that there's a few individuals that certainly fall within that description that I know.
Dr. Eric Davis once stated that during his time in AATIP, he located the reverse engineering programs holding the craft, and if they had been able to get access to the program, then they would have dramatically increased their understanding. During your time as the director of AATIP, did you locate programs that were working on the reverse engineering of non-terrestrial vehicles?
I can't answer that question, unfortunately.
That's fine, no problem. Now, I remember
I'm
also...
sorry. I don't mean to be
vague or evasive, but I can't answer that question.
In all honesty, that's answer enough, Lou. I remember the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, once mentioned how there is a chance that he was not informed on everything regarding the UAP portfolio during his time in government. How concerned are you about the potential subversion of legal oversight and government authority on this issue due to the possibility of the UAP portfolio essentially being hidden within the confines of private industry?
That's always a concern. There's people that don't want to have the conversation. They don't want to talk about maybe the progress or lack thereof that's been made. There's, I think, also a lot of fear as well. That's why we need to, rather than villainize individuals who may have been part of some sort of legacy effort, I think what we need to do is help them have the conversation, recognizing that, look, they were just doing your job at the time. We don't need to villainize anybody. And, maybe the answer is, to some degree, I hate to use the word offer some sort of immunity, but, in a very vague sense, give them the ability to have a conversation without fear of retribution or reprisal. And then, slowly have that conversation with the American people as well.
Well, I would personally be fully behind anything that would allow these things to come out and without risking, like you said, the livelihoods or anything of these people that have been involved, because you are correct. A lot of these people, if not most, if not all, are in their own mind serving their country and doing their job. And I don't think, I'm not one of those people that personally believes in hooded, cackling people in a room who are trying to trick us all with this. I think that it's a lot more complex.
Not. I can tell you that is absolutely not the case. That's not the case at all. There's no one in there that's purposely trying to hurt the world, hurt the American people, try to fool them, try to play gotcha. That's just conspiracy theory stuff. That really doesn't have any basis in reality. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the leaked transcripts that came from the estate of the late Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell that suggest a meeting took place between Dr. Eric W. Davis and the 13th director of the DIA, amongst other flag ranks, Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, wherein a scenario is described that involved the Admiral being essentially blacklisted from programs relating to UFO reverse engineering due to not meeting the criteria of what was called the Bigot list, which is apparently a closely selected list of individuals, and if you do not meet their briefing criteria, regardless of oversight authority or possession of the correct tickets, you will not be read into the program. Can I get your thoughts on what is known as the Admiral Wilson leaks? Do you believe this leaked transcript is describing a real incident?
Well, this kind of goes back, first of all, to your question about Chris Mellon and him saying that he never was briefed onto the program while he was inside, and that's a problem. A lot of programs exist, and not everybody is going to be briefed to or have access to a program. That's just the way our government works, and we accept that when we work for the government. But if there is something out there that displays extremely advanced capabilities, whether it's a weapon system or propulsion, I think there is a potential threat. There are countries out there we know that are a fact that if they had a strategic advantage on us, they would use those in an irresponsible way. They would use them probably as a weapon of war rather than a weapon of peace. And so, as a result of that, I think it's incumbent upon us to do our due diligence to make sure that if this technology is viable, it does not get into the wrong hands. That would be my suggestion. And we need to, now, what does that mean, right? I mean, people can say, well, you guys in the United States have had a history too of sometimes being abusive and not using technology in not a very nice way. And the response to that is, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I'm not sure what the solution really is. And this is why it's so important that we have the conversation at the macro level with our elected officials. And by the way, it is the people that need to drive that conversation. That's very, very important. And I think, until we're able to do that, we're still going to be asking these same fundamental questions. I don't want this technology getting in the hands of an adversary. I also don't want it getting in the hands of somebody irresponsible in my own country, right?
Right.
And this is why the more transparency we have by people, the harder it is for that to happen. We begin to have visibility into this area in a manner that makes it very, very tough for anybody to get away with anything, sneaky.
Now I'm gonna segue into something completely different here, but something that fascinates me is the undeniable overlap between secret societies, occult practices, and the phenomenon. A notable example of this comes from one of the pioneers of the American rocketry program, Jack Parsons, who was not only a genius rocket engineer, but also a devotee to the 20th century English magician and occult leader Aleister Crowley and his religion of Thelema. Alongside the occult ties and beliefs of the Americans who built the foundations of what would become NASA, you also have the undeniable occult ties that can be found within the Nazi Party, especially within the inner sanctums of the SS. Now, taking into consideration Operation Paperclip, where the Americans and Russians were fighting over getting the brightest of the Nazi scientists after the war, and the fact that high-level SS members became a part of the American rocketry program, is it fair to say that NASA was built almost entirely, if not entirely, by practicing members of the occult, both from the American side and from the Nazi side, that were brought over via paperclip?
Well, that's a really good question. Let me see if I can dissect that a little bit.
Please. I know it's quite a big one. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Occult and conspiracy theories and whatnot are usually originate in the vacuum of knowledge, and they leave room for speculation. And so belief now takes the place of fact. And belief isn't necessarily fact. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And so in this particular case, I think when you look at our country's history, including our founding fathers, there were always organizations and groups that influenced our country, to include our Constitution. Back then, it was the Masons. In fact, if you look at the Freemasons, if you were to look at the entire blueprint of Washington, D.C., we owe a lot of that and architecture to the contributions of the Freemasons. Now, that's not a bad thing. They're not a disruptive force. And of course, some people are going to say, well, that's not a cult. I'm not saying it's a cult. I'm just saying there's a long, deep, rich history of countries in particular, all countries, frankly, not just the United States, of being influenced from time to time by outside groups that have specific agendas. Some of those agendas are good. Some of those agendas are not so good. But it's nothing new. And so when you say NASA, has been influenced by the occult, my simple response is, well, of course it has. But it's not just NASA. It's a lot of institutions, even our military. When you look at our rank structure and the symbols that we use for colonels and whatnot, I mean, symbolism is everywhere. Look at the American dollar bill, right? I mean, look at the American flag. There's symbols in everything that we have of military heraldry. People's family crest is to some degree in the same way. It's a tradition, and that symbols mean something. I think the problem is when you allow when you allow any organization that's based upon faith and belief to drive the decisions and the results of scientific endeavors, that's when I have a problem with it. But the fact that NASA during Operation Paperclip recruited a bunch of folks, and some from the German Anna program, that doesn't really bother me. I know it sounds a little bizarre for some people. I think we need to be cautious and careful that we don't allow certain influences to outside to influence decisions being made on the inside based upon only trust or faith. I think that's the role of science. I'm always careful with conspiracy theories because most conspiracy theories have some sort of truth to them. There's a baseline truth. The problem is that you take that truth and you have 1% true, and then you stretch it with 99% bullshit, and that's where it becomes dangerous.
Well, the reason I asked it was because I was wondering if it bore any relevance to your own issues within the Department of Defense when it came to beliefs from high-ranking members of the government that these beings represented a demonic force and should not even be acknowledged, let alone studied. I was wondering if this current belief that's being held by high-ranking members of America's defense intelligence bureaucracy is a belief that's been bolstered by the occult history of America's space program.
No, that happened because of religion. There were what we were doing in AATIP in early days of OSAP was really challenging some people's personal theological positions. It wasn't because of, if you will, Ananerva or anything like that.
Right.
You know, the cult like that influencing decision makers within the Pentagon. It was far more mundane and common. It was organized religion in this particular case. But you know, I also have to be careful because people say, "Well, are you saying organized religion is the enemy?" No, it's not. I mean, I'm a man of faith myself. I just think we have to be very careful how we proceed with things. You know, when we introduce our own personal bias into the calculus of science, we always have to be mindful of that. And again, I'm not saying in this particular case that religion was bad, because I had a lot of people in AATIP that were very religious, and it did not affect our ability to run the program. So, you know, I guess it's a really good question, a question that probably would take us another hour to discuss. Because we're talking about
game if
the
you
psyche
are.
of people.
Something I wanted to touch on is the infamous slide 9 that was discovered by a fellow researcher, also called Jay, creator of the platform The Mind Sublime, who discovered on Christopher Mellon's webpage an AATIP presentation slide, which included within it some pretty disturbing conclusions. This is what the presentation slide said. The science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive environments in order to penetrate US facilities, influence decision makers, and compromise national security. The slide then goes on to list the applications of this science, which includes psychotronic weapons, penetration of solid surfaces, alteration or manipulation of biological organisms, instantaneous sensor disassembly, unique cognitive human interface experiences, and one of the most disturbing and intriguing, anomalies in the space-time construct. Now, this slide, if I'm correct, is essentially saying that a science or technology exists that would allow for the complete and total manipulation of both cognitive and physical environments, including the manipulation of the very fabric of space-time itself. Is that correct?
I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
Right. So this slide also mentions how the Department of Defense has been involved in similar experiments in the past and has relationships with renowned subject matter experts, finishing off by saying that the DoD controls several facilities where activities have been detected. Now, many credible investigators and government insiders have alluded to the participation of United States Special Forces engaging in psychological warfare, testing operations on US soldiers. Some have even claimed that perhaps these activities were responsible for a portion of the alleged UAP sightings over nuclear facilities and may have been conducted as penetration tests under the purview of a top secret program. One proponent of this theory is Dr. Jacques Vallée. In fact, he has been a long-standing proponent of this idea in various capacities over the years, hypothesizing that man-made illusions have in fact been behind a number of famous cases over the years, stating further that he has met Special Forces veterans who have admitted as much. In a fairly recent interview, Dr. Jacques Vallée stated that the famous Rendlesham Forest incident, which took place in the UK, was, quote, simply too similar to other psychological warfare exercises I am familiar with for me to jump to the conclusion that it was a UFO. Now, as I understand it, illusions like this may actually be possible, utilizing, for instance, holography towers and geoparabolic test beds on land that is rich in chromium ore. The idea goes back all the way to World War II, with the successful tactics of psychological warfare against the Germans in the form of phantom armies on the ground and phantom fighter planes in the sky. The concept also stems to things like Operation Bluebeam and even alleged false indication and warnings. Now, you, sir, with both an extensive background in the special forces as well as heading up AATIP, would appear to be an ideal candidate to speak on this topic. One may even be forgiven for feeling that you would have a need to know on this. Now, with that said, are you aware of any extraterrestrial UAP-related tests ever having been perpetrated against the United States military or the civilian population?
By Americans? By the American government?
Or yes, or by another foreign adversary, human.
Not by the American government at all.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident of that, because there's things that we have to deal with in the intelligence world. People don't realize that we're bound by law. Okay, there's something called a Procedure 15, which is basically involving questionable intelligence activities, and we do not have the ability to conduct experiments because in the past we did. We had things like the electric Kool-Aid acid test, and we had done some pretty nasty things, including the syphilis, where we as a government participated into some pretty abhorrent activities, very terrible, in fact. So as a result of that, laws were made to prohibit that from ever happening again. And that is a result of abuses that occurred in the past. So I think in today's day and age, it would be exceedingly unlikely for anybody in the U.S. government apparatus to be conducting tests like this against the American population. It would, first of all, there's too many oversight organizations that are watching. So it'd be next to impossible to get away with it for very long. And then two, most Americans are patriots that work in the government. You know, they're not out to try to hurt the American people. I think a lot of people think that there's this rogue element in there that goes unchecked and it's just, running amok within the U.S. government and trying to, trample on people's rights. That's never been the case that I've ever seen. I've never, ever seen that. Usually anybody who starts to do that is dealt with very, very quickly within the U.S. government. That type of behavior doesn't last for very long, if at all, just because there's too many people watching.